Greetings, everyone. Welcome back, Stackers. Here we're doing our accountability and responsibility part 2. Last time we were talking through individualized accountability and how oftentimes in an equation, there's multiple points of responsibility, whereas some responsibility might fall on someone other than self. But oftentimes, we should strive to be more honest with, what was our role? How did we affect things? What could we do differently? Because that's what we can control directly, our own actions and our own involvement. All right. Now I want to go a little bit farther. I know I started talking about corporate America because this is kind of what I see. I see that extension, and perhaps I'm hypersensitive because I know there's lots of positives. There's lots of scenarios where maybe this doesn't happen or it doesn't happen. Maybe I'm hypersensitive to the failures when I see something fail, but I just keep seeing these big corporations creating systematic structures where they can't be held accountable. An example, cell phone company, you walk in and let's say they overcharged you for something on your bill, not usually like a store, not an accessory or something like that, but store level. You try and get $1, one actual hardcore dollar. Like it won't happen. Where they'll give you a credit. Yeah, we'll give you a $30 credit because that didn't cost them anything. Okay, it was an opportunity to make profit, but it didn't actually cost them $1. So they actually have policies and procedures set up where they will not give you hardcore cash because that's it's opposite of what their business goal is. But notice how they ignore right and wrong. So if they stole $30 of cash from you because they overcharged you, they absolutely, ethically should return. Well, they shouldn't have done that. They should return that $30. Okay. Now, if you create a system where you never return the $30, you have now motivated, or at least in the short term, the behavior of just overcharging everyone $30 and then saying, "Oh, sorry, our bad. We'll give you a $30 credit." So now you've created this illegitimate way of creating a surplus and an influx of cash, because you basically, without their consent, are now borrowing $30, do that across 80 million people, and you just created enough money, in a short term, like 3-month investment style, to buy a company or something like that. And none of it was ethically good and done without consent. And their apologies, "Oh, sorry, we'll give you a bill credit." Like, okay, and they're doing stuff like this all the time. I've observed, maybe not on that scale, not 80 million people, but I've observed it happening multiple times. Okay, so then you look at some, like the Enrons, so maybe Big Tobacco is a good one. Here's another one, the pharmaceuticals. So they're earlier on, there's this great, I can't remember the name of the documentary, but Adderall is effectively speed from the 70s, and it's like speed's illegal, but Adderall's not. I mean, that's all just lobbying, so they create a copyright, which, by the way, destroys the free market competition, aka it's not a capitalist market, free competition. So these ideas, these really big companies that we see around us, they're all getting to be that way, not through healthy. I mean, there's some. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but they're often getting there through bad mechanisms and exploitations. Okay, and the topic accountability, the government's not holding them accountable. We're not holding them accountable, and they keep creating this disinformation and almost like campaigns of disinformation where we don't even know what they're doing wrong. How long did it take? So Facebook and Google, the big platforms, have been, we're the product, right? And in theory, we get no compensation that we're our products. Now, if you try to discuss that with somebody, they would be like, "Oh no, you're getting compensated in the fact that we don't charge you for the platform." Okay, that's not the same thing. And then ultimately, think about how many years it took you to be mainstream, figure out that you're the product. Why? Because they were hiding it. So if you don't have transparency of information, you can't make an informed decision as a consumer. If you can't make an informed decision as a consumer, how do you leverage your vote? Okay, and these big companies know that, and they have the power to manipulate that truth, which is why they do it that way. So we'll use that, or Facebook or Google. If it was very transparent up front, day one, that we're going to sell all your information, the sign up would have been way less. People would have been like, oh, well, the cost is too high. I don't want to give you that. I don't want to give you that authority over me, and I don't want my information being disseminated out like that. So instead, what happens, that it's typical sales, they talk about the good things, stay connected, blah, blah, blah. So then you're talking with all your friends on Facebook, and now you see the value, which is good, and the value is there. And then years later, you see the real cost comes out. Okay, well, that's not ethical. That's very disingenuous. And because of that, you weren't able to make the right decision at the time, because you didn't have the right and real information. I was talking about the Enron, like things like this where a company, me and my friend who always talk politics, we kind of fall on different sides of the line. It's not that we disagree, but we do actually, but it's because we fall on different sides of this line. So I think the individual needs to be held accountable. So if I ripped off a bunch of people, whatever, 6 million, 60 billion, doesn't matter. Like my life, if I ruined a bunch of people's lives, then the consequences should be my life should be ruined. Probably to the factor of how many people's lives I ruined. Whereas we kind of are in this scenario where, well, I'll use the Enron. Here's my take on it. Anybody who worked for Enron needed to be punished for that discrepancy. Now, and then I would draw a line where people who were proven to actually have knowledge, you should be in jail for life. Like not like a fine, no, like you're in jail for life because you did unethical, bad practices. We'll see the why here, why that's so important. But then people who were accomplices, aka even that entrance level Bob, who just started, yeah, but there need to be consequences for you joining the wrong team. Okay, and maybe they're very minuscule in that scenario, but there still needs to be consequences, because if you remove those consequences, people are not looking at the team and going, what's the value of the team? Do I want to be part of this team? Instead, they're going, oh, that's a job. It seems to pay well. Cool, I'll do it. So when you create this pathway where they don't have to be held accountable, they're always going to lean that way. It's almost like, that the dichotomy you see in the welfare state. Like, if I give somebody free money so they can pay their rent, then they don't need to get a job. So you're demotivating them to get a job to pay their rent. Okay, so it's that same like component. So back to why it's so important is because you can't reward good behavior. Okay, if I run this big company or whatever and I embezzle all this money and I get a slap on the wrist, like maybe you've seen 3 years in white collar prison, right? But I made $60 million, okay? And maybe I got fined $20 million. And by the way, like I'm hiding a lot of it. So it's not like, when they look at my asset sheet, they probably took all of it. But I hid it because I knew you were coming after my asset sheet, okay? So it's in a Swiss bank somewhere. So anyway, then I get out, in 3 years, and I've got $40 million that I hid underneath a rock somewhere. Well, you understand that I was motivated to rip people off. And now I'm going to do it again because I've got $40 million. I can take $30 million and I create another fake company or whatever to rip people off. So you can't be motivated. You got to be punishing the actual behavior and creating systems and directional force to correct those systems. So now here's the big part. I wanted to show how these same trends and shortcomings and failings I see relevant and apparent both in government and in our legal system. Let me start with the legal system first, because this one cracks me up. So legally, what our government does is they create a monopoly on force where they go, okay, you don't get to decide what's right and wrong. We're going to try and do that as a collective, but we get to enforce it. So they take away the authority to enforce and they put it on themselves. Okay? All right. So I can't do it my way. You got to do it your way. Okay. Then they kind of don't really enforce a lot of things. They're very reactionary, and I believe, from my observations, that it's a resource problem. They don't have unlimited resources, So what ends up happening is they can't just have cops patrolling everywhere, stopping all crime. So they're reactionary. And I'm okay with that component because the resource is actually true. But what I hate, and I see this all the time, like with the judges and stuff like that, is they don't seem to acknowledge their responsibility. Like, you failed me. What do you mean? Like, no, you failed me. Like, if somebody ripped me off, you've already failed. Okay? And I shouldn't be happy that you failed me. Like, I should be mad at you because you failed me. And you should fix it. Okay? And if you don't have a way to fix it, then you should understand that you are screwing me because you're not letting me fix it the way I want to fix it, or even just on my own action, you know? Such a great example. Let's say a friend of mine actually told me this story. Scenario came up where he has a son, and his friend's son was had an abusive stepdad, right? So his son is over there visiting, and one of these bouts happens. So this person, stepdad, is doing bad things, abusing stepchild, right? So yes, he's doing wrong things. Now, what happened about that? Nothing. This was an ongoing problem. He had been abused multiple times. Multiple people knew. That's a failure of our system. So then my friend, basically his son's over there visiting and sees this stuff going down, calls dad. It's like, wow, this is going, you need to come pick me up right now. So anyway, he gets involved, and his son got roughed up a little bit, and he's like, okay, cool, not all right. Drives over there, whoops the dude behind, whoops him. And then he got in trouble because, back to the original, remember we were talking that sometimes both parties have responsibility, but notice how his responsibility was in direct reaction, and I do think he needs to be held accountable to some degree, but it's a direct reaction to the failure of the system not stopping the problem. So crimes were happening, and it was just like, boop, and maybe it was reported, maybe it wasn't, but okay, so it's my job to report the crimes, which I agree with, but remember, there's a shared, but you're also should be stopping the crimes, and you're not saying, yes, I understand that we need to do better too. And then of course you get in front of the judge, and the judge is just like, just because they're in a position of power, and you have no authority to hold them accountable backwards in a reciprocal relationship. So I don't know, that's what I see, and maybe I'm a little skewed, but man, so I see a complete failure of our law system, up to and including, by the way, I don't want to get too far into this because this is going to be another talk coming up, but if you have money for a great lawyer, the law treats you better. I think I may have mentioned that 2 weeks ago, but that doesn't make sense. So we need to, create a better vision forward, So then let's slide to the government component, because all these things, and it would make sense if you see these trends in a small, isolated society or societal trend, you would expect to see it, consistent, as you magnify it up. And that's what you see. You see the governments, playing by different rules, not holding themselves accountable, both to individual actions when they do stupid things like, have email leaks or, cheat on wives, Bill Clinton, So I don't know, there's just this double standard, and they have the power and influence, to change the consequences, and they don't accept the consequences. So we need to try and, let me tie this in too. Once again, this will probably be a full talking at some point, but when you really think about, ask yourself, do you see a degradation of ethics and values in our current society? Like when you think back, maybe start 20 years, and then when you go think back 50 years, do you think our ethics and values were better as a society, the Western U.S. culture? And if you feel that there's been a degradation, and I think most people gravitate to what's probably tied to the reduction of religion, okay, religious presence. And while that may be true, do you understand that individually, if you didn't replace it with something, that's on you. Okay, so if you didn't like the story that was being told, by Christianity, that's fine. But if you didn't understand that, part of that message was a moral compass, okay, And what are the consequences of ignoring that moral compass? Okay, that's on you. That could have all you could have said, oh wait, I need to come up with a new vision of how I'm not going to be an a-hole. All right. So, so if you believe that that's happening, I personally do. That unethical behaviors, lying, whatever, just across the board. I could go on for days about this one. So I feel that people are just lying, cheating, beating the system every way they can, and what ends up happening is you see the guy at the top do it and you go, oh, okay, I guess that's the game. So I guess I have to, even though I don't want to do that, I have to learn how to do that if I want to sit at the table and I want to be part of the game. And then, times that by 20 years and you have a bunch of, greedy, unethical idiots, who are telling you lies and misinformation about what's really happening. We could use, I don't know, there's too many. I can't even get into examples. There's just too many. Pick any industry and I don't want to oversimplify because you can find, bad, just like there's bad people and good people. But like these are major corporations, yearly, that we entrust with, whether it's banking or Amazon, it doesn't matter. Like, and then you're like, I don't know if I brought up the Amazon and the clash they're having with authors on their audiobooks. So they just look at themselves as a platform, and they get their monthly subscription, and they pass along basically all the returns. If they sold 100 books and then 100 books were returned and then got 100 new books, so you could just create this return cycle where you're returning it, reading a new book, listening to a new book, and then you return it and listen to a new book. And Amazon doesn't care because they kept their money, and then they just pass along the return fee to the content creator, in this case the author, right? That's not like you got paid because I had my book. You created a loophole, not me. You created a loophole on your platform. Why? Because you didn't care. Because you're like, it doesn't cost me anything. Sure, this looks like great customer service. Yeah, because you're not taking a component of the fee, and then you pass it along to me, and then I can't write any more books because this is stupid. Anyway, all right, so that's kind of what I see. I just wanted to splash this out there, and it was too big for one video. So, starting with that lack of responsibility on the individual, but then you see it being mimicked and replicated in the corporate world, and then of course one way to look at it is government is the biggest unregulated corporation in the world, power entity, or at least in our, so you see those things replicated there as well, those behaviors. We need to acknowledge that, and we need to incorporate that into any vision for a better future where we try and correct it, and maybe it's not a perfect solution, but we need to get better towards removing some of that corruption and short-term thinking as opposed to long-term consequences, that kind of stuff. So let me know your thoughts. Go ahead and put them down in the comments, and got a couple new good ones that I want to talk about. So stay tuned.